It's May 2013. A man quits his job at a US federal agency, telling his supervisors that he has to seek intensive treatment for his debilitating epilepsy. This is a lie. He's actually booked a flight to Hong Kong. Once there, he will publish a set of documents to the internet that will confirm the existence of wide-reaching global surveillance programs that were previously only rooted in the realm of conspiracy theories. Edward Snowden's leaks would instantly become the biggest news story of the year and one of the most important moments of the 21st century. It would not only shape US surveillance laws going forward, but it would also permanently change people's attitudes towards privacy in the digital age. The idea that the government might be spying on even your most mundane online activities didn't seem so far-fetched anymore. In fact, the documents released by Snowden seem to suggest that US federal agencies could just directly access data stored in the servers of many popular internet services like Google, Facebook, or YouTube. It was also revealed that telecom companies like Verizon were just simply handing over millions of phone records daily to spy agencies. And this wasn't isolated to the US either. These American agencies were keeping tabs on people worldwide using privately run digital services. They were reading text messages and emails, listening to phone calls, and tracking your online activities using the cookies in your web browser. The scope of these programs was mind-boggling, but there was one part of these disclosures that seemed to fly under the radar, likely being overshadowed by the sheer magnitude of everything else surrounding it. These American three-letter agencies didn't just have their hands reaching into your iCloud accounts and Facebook profiles. No, they were also keeping track of what you were doing in the video games you were playing. Specifically, they were spying on you in World of Warcraft. Yes, World of Warcraft is mentioned by name in the documents Snowden released all the way back in 2013, but it kind of got overlooked by everybody at the time. It does make sense if you consider the scale of everything else in those leaks. The main story definitely wasn't about an MMO. But now, it's 13 years later, and I think it's about time we finally tell the story of how and why American federal agencies decided to infiltrate World of Warcraft. To set the stage for this, we have to understand how intel gathering got to the point of trying to spy on gamers in their virtual worlds in the first place. With the onset of the Cold War, English-speaking countries would begin negotiating an agreement to share all gathered intelligence amongst one another, an alliance that would eventually be called the Five Eyes. While the initial aim was to spy on the Eastern Bloc, the focus of the Five Eyes would only expand as time went on. The biggest shift would happen after the fall of the Soviet Union, which signaled a change in what was considered to be the biggest perceived threats to the Western world. It was no longer a single powerful large nation state, but rather smaller and more varied transnational threats, like rogue states, drug trafficking, and terrorism, which we'll return to in a little bit. This shift in intel gathering would coincide with the rapidly expanding global networks that were being established in the 90s, like the internet and satellite communications. To keep up with this, the Five Eyes would expand a program they had developed in the 70s called Echelon. It was originally designed around spying on Soviet satellite communications, but by the time the new millennium came around, the program had greatly shifted towards spying on regular people using the new technology like computers and cell phones that were quickly making their way into everybody's lives. For many years, conspiracy theories would float around about the different ways Echelon was spying on everyone. Was the government listening to your phone calls, reading your emails, and intercepting your faxes? Snowden's info dumps would actually confirm that Echelon was indeed doing all of that. It was also being used to spy on World of Warcraft players. In the mid-2000s, the USA was using Echelon to intercept and collect various pieces of data from players of World of Warcraft, including their IP addresses, location, time zone, and realm server addresses. To accomplish this, a tool called Snort was used, which was an open source piece of software that can intercept and inspect network packets in real time. According to the Snowden leaks, American federal agencies such as the CIA and NSA were able to use this information to identify World of Warcraft players and guilds that were supposedly related to Islamic extremist groups. This was the whole reason these American three-letter agencies were interested in World of Warcraft. They had a theory that terrorists were using virtual worlds as a sort of safe space to communicate with each other far away from prying eyes. It might seem absurd through the lens of 2026, but you have to remember that 2006 was a different time. Picture this. You've just gotten home from a hard day at the office, and there's only one thing you're looking forward to. Sitting down to watch television while eating a fine TV dinner. One problem, you forgot to feed the cat. and now he's taken matters into his own hands. There's a reason why you shouldn't leave a fat cat alone with lasagna, just like there's a reason why Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm. For over 35 years, Morgan & Morgan has been doing one thing and one thing only: fighting for the people with a track record that speaks for itself. When you've received over $30 billion for your clients, you know exactly what it takes to get people the compensation they truly deserve. Hiring Morgan & Morgan is like hiring an army to go into battle. They've got more than 1,000 lawyers and 100 offices nationwide. If you're injured by someone else's negligence, you deserve to be paid. Not all law firms are the same. Hire the wrong one, and you may be beat before you even start. If you're ever injured, you can check out Morgan & Morgan. Remember, their fee is free unless they win. For more information, you can go to forthepeople.com/feral. Thank you to Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring this video. For one thing, this was when video games held a much more controversial role in society. There was still a very active debate as to whether or not violent video games turned otherwise normal kids into hardened criminals. There was also a suspicion that MMOs in particular could be used to radicalize potential recruits for terrorist organizations, which was something that was investigated by the Reynard Project, a program started by various public and private intelligence institutions in 2008, which aimed to identify suspicious behavior in online video games by collecting all manner of player data. The terrorism angle, though, is slightly harder to reconcile. Even in 2006, the idea that Islamic extremists were communicating through WoW would have seemed ridiculous, but that was the point. If a method of communication seemed too absurd to even investigate, then it may in fact be the perfect place to slip under the radar, or at least to hide in the noise. In 2017, the CIA would publicly release a large cache of files found on the computers recovered from Osama bin Laden's compound after it was raided by US Navy SEALs in 2011. While many public reports refer to these files as Osama bin Laden's hard drive, these files in reality come from 183 separate devices, meaning these files are a pretty good representation of what you might expect to find on an extremist hard drive. Among the contents of these devices were the sorts of files you would expect: propaganda videos, reports on Al-Qaeda's activities, and correspondence between group members. But there were other much harder to explain things as well. Cat videos, wildlife documentaries, episodes of Tom and Jerry, an Ice Age movie, and a downloaded version of the classic viral video, Charlie Bit My Finger. There were also video games as well, like Final Fantasy VII, Resident Evil 2, Half-Life, and Devil May Cry. While you may assume that members of a group like Al-Qaeda were living a fully medieval lifestyle, they were in reality living in the same modern world as the rest of us. They had computers with video games on them. It wouldn't be impossible to assume they had access to World of Warcraft. Another important detail here is the War on Terror, which was in full swing in 2006. In the West, the 9/11 attacks had effectively replaced the long-gone fear of communism with a new anxiety: terrorism. But whereas communism was represented by actual concrete nation-states, the War on Terror instead focused on many different disconnected militant groups that were spread around multiple countries. These groups didn't fight traditional military battles. They would pop up in a random place, pull off a sensational and violent attack, and then immediately disappear to plan their next massacre. This created an atmosphere of anxiety among the Western players fighting against these jihadist groups. If you're old enough to remember 9/11, then you no doubt remember the significant up-ramp in security that occurred in the post-September 11th world. The Patriot Act would be put into law, which greatly expanded the tools available to federal law enforcement to strip away the freedoms of anyone they suspected may be involved in terrorist activity. It also expanded the surveillance capabilities of American intelligence agencies. Even if it may have seemed absurd for terror groups in the Middle East to be communicating through an MMO, even if the chance was incredibly tiny, the fact that there was even a possibility in the first place would have been enough for the intelligence community to at least investigate the idea, and to even maybe take some inspiration from it. Consider, if you will, this website. What does it bring to mind? To me, it appears to be an old-fashioned Star Wars fan page, the sort of website I would have visited as a kid on our family computer in the 2000s. It's got flash games, movies, fan art, but hang on. Something isn't right here. While the page may look packed with content, almost everything seems to be an external link. Every page linked on the top menu just displays an iframe, which is basically a way to embed external HTML content onto a web page. These iframes don't work on this archived version of the site, which just leaves everything here completely blank. The two other navigation menus on the homepage only link to external websites, and in fact, every link on the homepage except for the top menu links somewhere else. While this site may appear to be bustling with content, it's actually an empty shell. And on top of that, it's not a Star Wars fan site at all. In reality, it's a site run by the CIA. This antiquated website was recently discovered by security researcher Ciro Santilli, and it's not the only one. Haven of Gamers is another domain owned by the CIA that once hosted a late 2000s nerd culture website. This one is exactly like the Star Wars page. Almost everything here is an external link, making the site feel more flush with content than it really is. It's believed the CIA used sites like these to covertly communicate with spies operating abroad. Iranian intelligence would eventually discover and unravel the network though, which would lead to the deaths of several CIA assets between 2011 and 2012. So while it may seem far-fetched for any covert group to be operating in a seemingly innocuous digital environment, like an online game, there is clear evidence of something like it happening. Which kind of makes you wonder, did any of these American agencies actually turn up anything from investigating World of Warcraft? Probably not. There's never been any indication that terror groups were communicating in World of Warcraft. If anything notable was discovered, nobody's ever come forward to reveal that to the world. Not even Edward Snowden. I said at the start of this video that the US spying on World of Warcraft players was a story that flew under the radar. That is true. It was obviously overshadowed by the other vastly more significant revelations in the Snowden leaks. But it didn't go completely unnoticed. It was passed around mainstream news as a sort of comedic counterstory to lighten the depressing weight of the global surveillance conspiracy that Snowden had uncovered. Obviously, it's a silly use of CIA and NSA resources, but I can't help but to think it may have foreshadowed some of the dark things that would come into play in the near future of our digital culture. These days, the stories you read about online games being used as recruitment tools for extremist groups no longer have a comedic tone. The joke has become reality. It feels like every few months, a new story will start making their rounds on the news talking about how Roblox is being used to radicalize Western youth. The idea of Nazi imagery in kids' online games would have seemed ridiculous in 2006. It's a concept firmly rooted in old-school 4chan escapades, like the Habbo Hotel incident. But stories like that were almost always due to adult infiltrators simply doing a little trolling. Nowadays, it's commonplace for actual extremist groups to be forming relationships with children through the games they play. You may assume that Roblox worlds which depict hateful imagery and scenarios are the results of some kids being edgy, but you can find multiple documented cases of neo-Nazi groups successfully recruiting young gamers through these games. It's not some out-of-touch old people paranoia, it's a thing that's actually happening. Which makes you wonder, where's the government spy effort now? It might not have been warranted back in 2006, but surely, with actual documented cases of extremist groups operating in online games, it must be a reasonable thing to try now, right? Well, they likely are spying on Roblox players, and World of Warcraft players as well. The problem is, it doesn't stop there. The outrage over the things found in the Snowden leaks was massive, and while it has influenced US law, it seems like things just got worse as time went on. Sure, online privacy is something people actually think about now, and things like Signal, Brave browser, and all the different ways you can lock up your iPhone are a direct response to the rightful paranoia Edward Snowden instilled in the general public. But the government just kept carrying on as it had, only reaching ever further into our private digital lives. Palantir, a company which makes the majority of its money from US government contracts, develops software that can parse through massive sets of data and sort it all automatically. That might seem mundane on the surface, but it's what lets the US take all the seemingly unorganized and useless data they collect on their citizens and turn it into a dystopian surveillance machine, one that has the capability to track people's movements with facial recognition, and also their activities on the internet, including the online games they play. If you're curious how border guards found all your social media profiles, it's because Palantir's software has built a profile on you that contains all the public personal information that you've put on the internet. By the way, I don't just want to target the US here. Palantir has been steadily gaining many customers in Europe as well. It seems like we've all just accepted that Big Brother is watching us, there's nothing we can do about it. But there was a time when even the ludicrous idea that the CIA was collecting your IP address in World of Warcraft was enough to generate at least a bit of outrage. Guys, thanks for watching. I know this was a bit of a short one, but there is a good reason for that. You can check my Instagram if you want to find out why. Regardless, thanks for making it to the end, and I'll catch you in the next one.